Hi everyone, Dr. Gustin here, and I wanted to give you kind of a short introduction to the characteristics of a virus. Now, this semester we've been talking about eukaryotic cells, and these are the cells that make up organisms like humans and plants and fungi and all those different things. And we know that they have various parts, cell membranes and a cytoplasm that has a nucleus and mitochondria and all sorts of ribosomes and other structures. We also know that cells are considered living and they can reproduce, they can respond to their environment and control their environments. Bacteria are similar to eukaryotic cells, and I think we just mentioned these at the beginning of the semester. We called them prokaryotic cells, and they did not have a nucleus, and they're much smaller, 10 to 100 times smaller than eukaryotic cells. So we know about our own cells, eukaryotic cells, bacterial cells, prokaryotic cells, but then there's viruses. And as it turns out, viruses are not cells at all. They actually are kind of like living organisms because they have nucleic acid. Remember, nucleic acid is DNA and RNA. And so viruses do have nucleic acid. And so they do encode genes and they are able to make proteins, but only if the virus infects a host. So it turns out every living organism on the planet, including bacteria, can get viral infections. So once a virus infects a host, it's able to use its nucleic acid to make proteins and create new viruses. So viruses do some things like living organisms, like reproduce, but they're not able to do a lot of things, like they don't have a metabolism, they don't respond to their environment. And so viruses are actually pretty amazing and complex chemicals. And if we look at a virus, the structure, the whole thing, here we have, like I said, all viruses have a nucleic acid. Now, one of the things to remember about viruses is that their nucleic acid can be DNA or RNA. Remember, inside the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell, or even the nucleic acid in prokaryotic cells, is going to be DNA that carries the genes. They use DNA, then they make some RNA to make proteins. Viruses can start off with DNA or RNA. And one of the videos is going to talk a little bit more about that. So you have the nucleic acid, and then surrounding the nucleic acid is a protein coat called a capsid. And remember, proteins are really important structural molecules. So here you've got the nucleic acid, that's the instructions on how to make new viruses, and that's surrounded by a protein coat. And that's the minimum that a virus can have. Now, depending on the kind of virus, they may have some additional structures. And one of those structures is, so here's our nucleic acid and our protein coat called the capsid. But some viruses actually have something called an envelope, and an envelope is similar to a plasma membrane. And so here is an example of an enveloped virus that has this kind of membrane structure around the capsid. And then embedded in that envelope, that particular virus may or may not have some other protein structures called spikes. Now, a lot of times these spikes help the virus attach to hosts, or they act as enzymes. So in this diagram, it's showing you a naked virus versus an enveloped virus, and you can see that how the structure is different. All viruses have a nucleic acid and a capsid. Some viruses, particularly the enveloped viruses, have an envelope, and they may or may not have these protein spikes. I think I'm gonna go to the next one. So what I put here is some specific examples of coronavirus. So that first virus I showed you was just kind of a general description, but coronaviruses have some unique characteristics that define them as coronaviruses. First of all, you can look at either this computer generated version or this cartoon version, and you'll notice both of them have a lot of spikes. So it turns out coronaviruses are enveloped viruses, and they have an envelope around the capsid. And the the in that envelope, there's lots of spikes. And so it turns out the coronavirus is actually named after the spikes, and the spikes create what scientists think kind of look like a crown. So that's why they were called coronaviruses. So I was just looking at this virus. It looks like they don't have the capsid drawn in here, but they do have the RNA. So it turns out that coronaviruses are RNA viruses. So the major things you want to remember about coronaviruses that distinguish them from viruses in general is they have an envelope. They have RNA instead of DNA. They have an envelope, and they've got a lot of spikes in that envelope. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of those things as we progress through this unit. And what I did is I just put a little summary here to describe the differences between bacteria, which are actual cells, and viruses. So remember, bacteria are living, viruses are not. Bacteria are made of cells, viruses are not. It even talks about how bacteria are sensitive to antibiotics because they disrupt the metabolic machinery. But remember, viruses are going to have to infect a host. So the virus itself is not affected by antibiotics. The host might be. Talks about some bacteria are beneficial, some cause diseases. Viruses are generally not considered beneficial, and although there may be some examples of things we just aren't aware of. And remember that bacteria are a lot bigger than viruses, anywhere from 10 to 100 times bigger than viruses. So viruses are really small. So there's your summary for just general virus structure and some of the things that make coronaviruses unique.